Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? Today is Tuesday. It's the afternoon. It's cold outside. Glad that you guys can make it here with me. Anyway, let's get started with our class. Did you know that Better Spaces is a health and happiness solution that is made for today's hybrid workplace? My name is Dr. Paul Kachoa, and I've partnered with them to bring you this easy and educational workday session. So today's session is called Winter Mobility Reset, so that you can undo the stiffness of sitting, shoveling, and stress. So we're going to kick off this new year, January 2026, by restoring the mobility and flexibility with drills to loosen up your hips, your spines, your shoulders, so that you can move better, you can feel lighter, and reduce everyday aches from sitting, shoveling, and cold weather tension. So we're going to cover the 3 tightest areas in the body that get tight during winter and how to unlock them, and a hybrid mobility workout routine, that you can do anytime, sitting, standing, whatever, and how certain areas of stiffness and mobility restrictions affect neck pain, headaches, back pain, all that stuff. And then maybe we'll go over also a 6-minute daily winter mobility warm-up. Okay? Sound good? So a little bit about me. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, owner of PAR5 Physical Therapy here in Randolph, New Jersey. And I got my doctorate in physical therapy from Mercy University back in, I think, 2010. And also I have an exercise physiology bachelor degree from Rutgers. I think that's like 94, I think. And I'm also an orthopedic clinical specialist and, golf medical professional, golf fitness instructor, and level 1 CrossFit coach and certified dry needling specialist. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And let me pull up my slides here. The stuff that we're going to be talking about is geared at a broad population. So one of the things that I always talk about is, if you're dealing with something specific, make sure that you have yourself, get a full physical exam. All right. All right. So here we are. Winter mobility reset. Hopefully you can see my slides here floating in space. If I kind of take this, let me see if I can turn my clicker on. There we go. All right. So the important note here is that it's not physical therapy. This is, again, like I said, general advice that if you're dealing with something specific, make sure that you get a thorough exam. You want to also remember that the stuff that we're going to be going over, you want to go through it nice and gentle, be cautious, do it slow, but be consistent. You do them frequently. You don't have to set aside time for exercise or movement. You can do them throughout the day. There's little exercise or workout snacks, as we call them. Pain should never be part of any stretch or exercise. Certainly something that might be uncomfortable when we stretch or move a tissue into its end range should immediately go away and not feel any worse when we remove that stress or stretch on that tissue. So just be cautious, go slow, and take it easy. All right. If you've been to any of my classes before, this video is going to look familiar. It basically explains how the body functions. The body functions on this alternating pattern of stability and mobility. These segments, these alternating pattern of segments, if they're disrupted, then pain or injury is usually the result. It causes a lot of pain. So if you start at the foot here, the foot is supposed to be a stable segment, and then we go to the ankle, which is supposed to be mobile, and then the knee, which is supposed to be stable, then the hip, which is supposed to be mobile. So you get that from all the way from the bottom, all the way to the wrist, and even to the base of the head and the neck. This alternating pattern is what we want to try and restore when we're talking about decreasing pain, increasing normal physiological function. What tends to happen is that if we lose mobility, say, for example, in your thoracic spine, your T-spine, or your hips, the next segment, above or below, can become dysfunctional. If we lose mobility in one part, our body wants to regain that mobility in another part. So the back, the lower back, for example, that's supposed to be stable. But if you're tight in your hips or your thoracic spine, then the lower back turns into an unstable segment or a mobile segment. And that's how our body compensates basically through our daily movement, because our body knows movement. It doesn't know muscle. To activate the specific muscle when accomplishing a task, it doesn't matter. Your body is going to seek the path of least resistance as it accomplishes the task. All right? So, why do people feel tight in the fall and the winter? Cold temperatures can decrease the circulation in the extremities. If we don't move because we're all huddled up, joints can stiffen, muscles can contract, and also we're spending less time outside, and most time people become less physically active. And that, also the change in humidity and the lower barometric pressure, that could also affect how our body feels. And also, a couple of my clients also suffer from seasonal affective disorder. This is, again, because of the change in the amount of light that goes into our eyes, our nervous system, it kind of goes a little bit wonky, mild depression sets in, the inability or the lack of motivation to accomplish certain tasks. So that's all documented in all research. So all of that stuff. So that's why some people will feel tighter in the winter when it gets cold. So some of the common tight areas that we're dealing with are things that are supposed to be mobile. The hips, the neck, the shoulders, and also, aches and pains, especially from, repeated bending or lifting in the lower back, that can also feel tight. And a lot of times when we try and do too much stretching or mobility work for an area that's supposed to be stable, that tends to feel good in the short term, but doesn't address it long term, right? So example, if your hips are tight and you say, hey, my back is tight, I feel like it's really sore back here, right? And I'm gonna need that out. I'm gonna do whatever, stretch my back, get a massage to my back, but my hips remain tight. Every time that I move, because I lack that mobility in my hips, my back is just gonna do what it's been doing, compensating for that lack of mobility in another segment. And then, because of that overuse of the spine of the back, then it feels tight again. So it's a short remedy, but not a permanent solution. So a couple of things that happen with joints. I mean, this slide here is very, very busy, but essentially, I'm going to summarize it, what all this means. So your joints have cells in them that produce synovial fluid and other material to help lubricate a joint. And these joints are stimulated to produce the synovial fluid with movement. So when you're cold and you're not active, all the fluid in your joints becomes more viscous. It becomes thick. It's like molasses. It's like the old oil in a car. We want to create movement. Our bodies were meant to move, built to move, to produce the synovial fluid and lubricate our joints. So it's very common that if you're sitting, watching a movie, watching TV, or sleeping, or going to take a nap, and then you go to move, if you're in a prolonged static position, it's very common that when you get up, you feel really stiff. You're like, oh my God, my whole back, hips, shoulders, I've been in this position, working on this document or doing this job, sitting for such a long period of time, that when you go to move, yeah, initially it's going to feel stiff. Not only just with the synovial fluid in your joints, but also soft tissue such as like fascia, muscles, tendons, all of that stuff gets stiffer because there's lack of circulation when we're not moving. All right, so then there's this. If we spend a lot of time sitting, because we are an industrialized society, most of our stuff, our work is down in front of us, we typically get into these postures. And I know that it says here that's like incorrect, 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 and then correct. Really, there is no such thing as perfect posture. I'm going to repeat that. There's no such thing as perfect posture. So even though you might get a position where you're at 90 degrees and have really good posture and your ergonomics are perfect, because you are in that one position for an extended amount of time, this also can lead to problems. So any one position, my rule of thumb is every 30 minutes, you want to get up and move and get these segments, these joints, where the knee is bent, the hips are bent, into the complete opposite direction as often as possible. One other thing that tends to happen is this thing. And you could say, you know, it's like text neck or whatever. So if you're looking at your phone, every degree, let me blow this up so you can see the numbers. So relatively, every degree that your head tilts forward, it increases the relative weight of your skull, of your head on your neck. So if we're in a neutral position, you know, our head normally weighs 10 to 14 pounds, 10 to 12 pounds as seen here in the picture. But if we get down into a really hunched position, up to 60 degrees, the weight of the head increases to 60 pounds. And you know what? That's like a small child on your head, on your shoulders. And if you're in there for a long period of time, that can cause a lot of those muscles that are holding you up to be on for such a long time. They're very active, they get fatigued, they feel tight, they adaptively become on, and they don't turn off. And it's hard to turn off or stretch a muscle when a muscle doesn't turn off. All right, now, next one is movement vocabulary, this idea. And I took this picture off of like a kindergarten website, but basically when you're young, you have this movement vocabulary that grows as you develop, right? You think about like infant, doesn't do anything. It just lies there, right? It's like 6 days old. It doesn't do anything but just eat and then close and open its eyes. And then you start to develop a movement vocabulary that starts to include crawling, rolling, standing, walking, running, jumping, all of these things, squatting. Movement vocabulary, just like regular vocabulary, is a skill that if we don't maintain it, we will lose it. Our vocabulary starts to decrease. Then we lose the ability to do a squat, a hop, a bend, because we never do it. All right, so variety and variation in movement and position is probably the best thing that we can do throughout our day. All right. I think I mentioned this earlier, that muscle tightness does not equal muscle shortness. Oftentimes, clients will come in to see me and they'll say, oh, you know what, I can't touch my toes because my hamstrings are so tight, which causes my back to hurt. And like, all right, I'm going to stretch my hamstrings, and I still feels tight. Well, a muscle tightness doesn't necessarily mean that it's short. What could happen is that muscle has this level of tone or activity that prevents it from turning off. So if we think about when we're bending forward, right, all the muscles in the back part of our body, called the posterior chain, the muscles that connect from our heel all the way up the back to the base of our head, all of those muscles are basically the postural muscles. And if we bend forward, those muscles have to organize and turn on a certain way to prevent us from falling forward. So if I go down to try and touch my toes, and what my body is going to use to hold me up is my hamstrings, because they're part of that posterior chain, they're on to prevent me from falling over if I move a certain way. And then because that muscle is on to hold me up, to stabilize me against gravity, they're not going to lengthen or relax enough sufficiently to allow full range of motion and have you touch your toes. So that's just an example that I run into frequently with clients that come in that feel tight, but necessarily when we go test the length of the muscle, it comes back to be normal length. It's just that they're just undertoned. They just don't turn it off. And pain can also affect how these muscles activate or not activate. If you're in pain, that throws off everything. It's sort of like, you know, the pain is a signal from your body to tell you that something's wrong, but it can affect how you move. If you have an ache or pain that consciously or subconsciously your body knows about, it will protect it in some way, change the way that you move to relieve pain or avoid it or protect it. So really simple example is that if you sprain your ankle and you go to walk, you're going to have a limp, right? Until that tendon, that foot heals. So a really simple mobility test. And then this is going to be interesting because I am stiff just like with everybody else, all of you. Let's transition into this. The mobility test. All right, so we're going to go through this mobility test and you can try this on your own. Physiologically, we have norms. We have vital signs. Just like if you take a blood pressure or take your heart rate, we have numbers that are normal for your age and whether or not you have some type of underlying condition or disease. All right, so mobility. range of motion. This is the vital sign. We're going to stand with your feet together. And we just mentioned this. Feet together, knees straight. Keeping your knees straight, we're going to bend and see what happens. And the goal is to touch your toes. So let's see. I haven't done this in a while. I've been standing and working for a little bit. And I'm going to see, can I touch my toes and keep my knees straight? I think I can, right? So you should be able to do that. If the knees do not bend or they don't stay locked out, then it's a fail. If you bend your knees, that's a fail. If you can't touch your toes, then yeah, that's a fail as well. One of the things that we mentioned before was the hamstrings turning on to hold you up. One of the key points that we could do to turn that off is make sure that we have what we call a posterior weight shift. I stick my butt out, because if I don't stick my butt out and I go ahead and go forward, then all the weight goes forward. I feel like I'm going to fall forward. Hamstrings turn on immediately. If I set my hips back and then try and go down, sticking my hands, my butt out, that'll help with maintaining my base, my center of gravity over my base of support, my feet, so that I can go down. So then, all right, so that's number one. Check that yourself. And then we have multi-segment extension. Oh, the other thing too, by the way, is that as we're going forward, one, can you touch your toes? Two, is there pain? If there's pain, then that is a red flag already. If you can't touch your toes, that's a little bit of a red flag. We can probably tease that out and figure out why, and then, you know, work on it. But then there's also the quality of motion. As you go down, hopefully you could see this in the camera. There you go, and get into this position. We want to see a uniform curvature of your spine. I'm trying to do this as much as I can, so that a lot of times people will feel tight in their spine. I've seen people do this when I go tell them, hey, can you touch your toes? And they do this. They keep their spine straight and be like, I'm touching my toes and I can't get there, because they haven't really rounded their spine. So how do they do that? So the quality of motion is important, as well as the how much you're doing, all right? So we want to see like a full rounding of the back and a uniform reversal of the curve that happens in the spine. So normally there's this there's lordosis, this curvature of your lower back, and a rounding of your mid back, and then the extension of your neck. We want to be able to reverse all of that as we go down into that position. And the same thing can be said to the next test, which is multi-segment extension. What we do, I'm going to tell you right now, that you're going to see a fail here because my elbow doesn't go totally straight, if you can see it on the camera. But basically, feet together, knees stay straight. We're going to bring the hands over your head as you look up, and then the hands go back and the hips go forward. Okay? So from the side view, I'm going to show you this and see if I can get this right on camera. My front of my pelvis, this is the passing grade here. My front of my pelvis should pass the line that's above that's in front of my toe. So let's make it real easy. I'm going to do this right here. I'm going to go, here's the line in front of my toe, right, with the orange stick. And then if my hips go forward, the front part of my hips go past that, that's a pass. And then as my arms go over, can I get my bicep to my ear, over my head, without having it come out to the side? All right, so this is different than this. And does my shoulder blade, right, go past the, hopefully get this in line here, the heel, right? Does my shoulder blade get past my heel? Which it does. Okay, so that's a little bit easier for me now that I've been standing for a certain amount of time. And then we can look at rotation. So these are like the 30,000 foot view of these movements. And then if we fail or have poor movement quality with any of those movements, then we have to dive in and do specific tests and manual tests, assessments to figure out what the root cause is. The last one I'll show is just rotation. So feet stay together, knees stay straight. Hopefully I'm on the camera here. And then I'm going to not move my feet, arms stay relaxed. I'm going to turn my head, shoulders, and hips as far as I can. And it's a little tight for me, but essentially if you're standing behind me, you should see, whoo, look at that, my opposite shoulder, the front of my opposite, you should see this come forward. Let's try the other side, because I'm a little tight that way. So let's go, feet together, knees stay straight, arms stay relaxed. You're going to turn your head, shoulders, and hips. Can you see my left shoulder, or front part of my left shoulder? So that's the test that we do, multi-segment tests, to figure out whether or not you pass. All right, so let me just pull up my slides real quick. You can see those. Okay, so mobility test. All right, So then we talk about stretches. So real quick, there's several different types of stretches. We have like joint mobilizations, dynamic and static stretches. Joint mobilizations is when we take a joint and kind of lubricate it. Here we go. The example is my finger. I move that through a large range of motion. The more I do it, the more I lubricate the joint. All right, so that's a joint mobilization. You can add overpressure with certain techniques to improve the joint mobilization. And then we have dynamic and static stretches. If I have that joint and I'm moving through that joint of motion and I try and add an overpressure, then there's certain ways. I don't know if I have time to show you, but then we mobilize the joint. But if I go through that range of motion for that joint and kind of move quickly, then that's a dynamic stretch. Static stretches are ones that are held for 30 seconds or more, where you're just holding, stretching out a tissue, and then just trying to lengthen it and relax into that position. There's purposes for each of these three. And I have had other classes on the Better Spaces apps. You could probably look up for the stretching, and I go in depth with those three types. All right, so let's get into our 6 minute mobility warm up. I think I got this down to 6 minutes. Let's check it out. So standing flexion and extension, we just did that. And that test turns into, let me just turn that on. That test turns into our mobility exercise, right? So I can kind of get into this position. This is almost like a yoga pose where we're going sun salutation and then this kind of folding over and just kind of going through. Again, moving our body through a large range of motion, usually, preferably in the opposite direction that we normally spend our time, most of our time in. So that's one, we just did that. Another one, if you can, is to get onto your hands and knees and do these cat camels, where we're kind of rounding out, hopefully that's on the camera, cool, where we go from this rounded position, tucking my head, and then extending my head as I sag. So I'm going through this range of motion. Again, this is sort of like a dynamic stretch working through there. If you can't do hands and knees, you can always do it in the seated position. You go into a chair, let's scooch forward so you can see this on the camera, and then kind of do this, and then this. Then we have this full flexion and extension in a supported position, similar to that cat and camel. And if we go for about 30 seconds of this, that's sufficient. All right, and then we have this thing called the groiner. And this typically is done in a hands and knees position like this. So I have my foot out in front of me, my other knee is down, my hands are on the ground, and then basically I just take my hips and I kind of go forward and backward. This is an easy version. The other more advanced version is to do it with the leg out straight. And then what I do is I swivel my hips forward and backward, and I get this stretch into my hip and my hamstring as I go backwards. So here I am, joiner, groiner, groiner, 30 seconds each side. I could do this on the other side or sitting as well. If I couldn't get into a kneeling position, I basically do this, and I have this leg out in front. So I got this leg straight, this leg bent, and I kind of lean forward and then go backwards. So I want to open up the front part of my leg here and then get into a position. As I bend forward, I get this stretch into the front. So I'm stretching both legs back and forth. And then thoracic spine rotation. Thoracic spine, our mid-back, is designed to rotate. So one way to do that is, again, in this quadruped position, preferably hands and knees on the ground. I'm going to take my hand behind my head and then rotate through the thoracic spine, keeping my knees and hips in place. 30 seconds each side, the thoracic rotation. If you can't do that in kneeling or in that floor position, you could do the same in standing. Just got to keep your hips and knees straight. Sometimes what I'll do to keep them locked in place is I'll just cross my ankles. Usually that'll lock them in place sufficiently. All right, and then the hip drop. We move down to the hips, then we would flip over, and then let's see here on the camera, perfect. Wide stance with the feet, and then just let the knees kind of do a windshield wiper thing. The hip and the back can come up, again, pain-free range of motion, nice and slow, just letting the knees and the legs, the weight of the legs stretch out the hips. Very easy hip rotation that you can do this. If you want to do it seated, you can put your legs out in front and then kind of rotate like this in the chair as well. And then super simple hamstring stretch. We can go on your back and then hold that leg and then just pump the ankle 30 seconds up and down. straightening the knee as much as you can. As you do that, the seated example for those two things, hip drop, I'm going to be sitting at the edge of the chair, wide stance, and just letting my knees rotate like that. You know, I could be leaning back against the back of the chair, and then the hamstring stretch is basically holding it out like this, and then pumping the ankle up and down. When I pull up like this, it's a bigger stretch. If I point, less of a stretch, but still useful, 30 seconds each. And that should wind up to be your 6-minute daily mobility workout routine. All righty. So quick through there. Let's pull this up. Boop. All righty. So let's check the chat and see if there's any questions. Yep. Let me know if there's any questions. I'm going to give it a 30-second countdown before we close things out for the day. Let me know what's going on. Okay. Looks like we're all good. I'm going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you for joining me today. You could look for this session and many more on demand on any of the Better Spaces apps. I will be back Tuesday, January 20th. We're going to go over a class called Knee Pain 360. Fixing the real sources of pain, not just the knee. So you can learn why, I gave you a little preview today, you can learn why the knee pain it rarely comes from the knee itself. The session is going to break down the common root causes, weak hips, stiff ankles, poor movement patterns, and gives you easy tests and exercises to reduce your pain, build stability, and return to all your activities with confidence. If you have any other questions, you can email me here at paul@par5pt.com or team@betterspaces.com. All right, thank you for coming. Good day, be well.